By the time they got out to the Moot point, Edgy had been informed about what happened with Big Bubba, and just to make a long story short, he had harassed uh, uh, Elaine when she was at the pool table. She was just trying to do her job, young girl, second day on the job, and he'd been messing around with her with a pool cue. And what she got so mad. Oh, and he was a gross looking guy, just sleeveless, muscle shirt, big, every inch of him covered with tattoos, wore a hat, left it on inside, and he had 4 or 5 buddies with him that looked just about like him, weren't quite as big. But in spite of that, Elaine got so mad that he would treat her like that she said to him, looked him square in the face and said to him, "You probably squat to pee." And then, his buddies all thought that was so funny someone would talk to Big Bubba like that. And then she grabbed the pool cue, broke it over her knee, took the butt end and nailed him right in the nuts, dropped him. And then she grabbed her purse and marched out of there without another word. She quit. Well, that had been the Saturday before. But the owner, Omar, had called her Sunday then. That was Saturday night. Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and practically begged her to come back. He gave her all kinds of assurances that would not happen again, that Big Bubba was a persona non grata. He'd been alerted that he was not welcome there. The local constable, or I don't know, police officer, something like that. What was his name? Roscoe T. Nutcole, I think was the guy's name. Anyway, he'd been alerted, and he was ready to come if Big Bubba came around. That was so. Anyway, she thought she'd give it a try because she was already kind of a hero to the small clientele that he had. He didn't have a big clientele yet. So anyway, he'd been informed, and now you are too. That was kind of quick, but it had really upset Elaine, and she didn't think she'd go back in spite of the way she approved of what Omar and Indira were trying to do there. So now you're up to date on that. Well, when they went in, immediately, well, before they even went in, Elaine noticed that there was a horse and carriage out in the wagon shed, and she thought, her new acquaintance that had been there before, that would be Rachel and Jacob, the Mennonite couple. And she went in, and sure enough, she saw him, but Rachel was wearing an apron, and they'd both been hired. Omar was afraid that Elaine would never come back, and he was, had to see about could he find somebody. So he'd asked the two of them if they'd work there, and so that was a happy moment for Elaine and also for Rachel and Jacob, because they had a nice meeting. Well, anyway, their introductions were made. Elaine hadn't even met, the doctors hadn't even met Elaine's Gma, her grandmother, yet, Violet. So that was made, and then Edgy was introduced to Omar, Dr. Omar Al-Hakim, and then his wife, Dr. Indira Patel. And then Elaine busied herself getting ready, and Indira, Dr. Indira. Well, I need to stop saying doctor because they didn't like being called that all the time. Indira took her off and was working on that. And then Edgy and Violet and Omar began to talk a little bit. And it was like Edgy to not bring up the scroll right away. They had it, and they did want to mention it, but not right away. He wanted to know about Omar, he was genuinely interested. That's the way he was, and he told him, that he was fascinated by the fact that, I didn't tell you, Omar was wearing a turban, and he was Pakistani, but actually, the truth was he was of Afghan extraction. And it's so unusual that he would be married to Indira, who was pure Gujarati, was what her native language was, but she was as Indian as you could get. But anyway, Edgy was fascinated, and he said that, you don't look Afghan or Pakistani. You look oddly sort of English. You're tall, and I mean, maybe this is personal, but I think that's fascinating. And Omar said, "Well, you're onto something there, Edgy. My middle name is Athelstan. I'm actually Omar Athelstan El Hakim." And at that, Edgy lit up and said, "Ah, Athelstan King by any chance?" And at that, Omar lit up and said, "Yes, how did you know? I usually don't leave that part out, but my whole name is Omar Athelstan King Al Hakim." And how did you know that? And Edgy said, "Well, let me guess something else. Do you have a cousin or a brother named Talbot? And how about a cousin named Mundy?" And Omar just was amazed. He said, "Yes, not a cousin, a sister named Mundy, and I do have a cousin named Talbot. And how did you know?" And he Edgy was having fun with this, and he said, "And I'll bet your great grandmother was a great dancer, and I'll bet if you ever had your DNA checked, I'll bet there's some Greek in you, maybe Macedonian." Actually, Omar did know how he knew that. He said, "You've read King of the Khyber Rifles, haven't you?" And Edgy said, "Well, yes, of course. I first read it when I was just a kid. It was a Classics Illustrated comic book, and I loved it. And then later on, got the book, and I read it. And but so as soon as you said Athelstan, that's not a very normal name. I thought, But so either your parents were no. If your DNA was like that, I'm guessing that story is supposed to be fiction. But that must have been based on a true story." And Omar said, "Well, yes, it was." Well, I'm impressed. You must have had a good education somewhere along the line, or you must be awful smart. At that point, Violet said, "Oh yeah, he went to Yale, and that's just the start of it. I mean, he's really smart." Well, they got talking, and they were almost. I mean, Omar was just so taken with Edgy, and Edgy, for his part, he said, "Now, how did you? You're doing something very different here. I've never been to a place like this. How did you manage to pull this off? That must have taken some doing." And Omar said, "Oh yeah. Would you like to hear a little bit about that?"